Hello guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about a little carburetor adventure that I had. So last weekend I took the car for a drive, about a 45-minute drive there and back to a town nearby, and did great on the way up there, no problems at all. But on the way back, it kind of seemed like we were having vapor lock issues. So I ended up pulling over several times because it would just start missing like crazy. Just trying to maintain speed was very hard because it started missing. And one of the times that I pulled over, I pulled the, I want to check my float adjustment. I want to make sure the floats were not too low or too high. So I took the screw, set screw off the bowl, and tons of vapor came out, tons of pressure released. And it was a gas, not a liquid, because I expected liquid fuel to come out, but it was not liquid. So I guessed that it was vapor locking. Essentially, that was the only thing I could think of. So I had to drive home. It was very low throttle angles. Thankfully, it would run and drive me home, but definitely not preferable. So I got home. We rigged up a fuel filter and another fuel line, and we have a return line now. Back to the tank, it's a 1/4 inch return line. And today, going to the car show and back, had no problems like that at all. So that's great. I think it worked. It also was a little cooler today, but not a whole lot. So I think that that was a good fix, hopefully, for that problem. And hopefully we don't ever have that again. But when I got home last weekend, I was very disappointed with my 800 dwell pumper. And since the beginning of me using that carburetor, I've been told by a couple people to, that was a poor carburetor choice for my purposes, right? Since I'm not racing it, I'm just driving it around. That's way too much carburation, and I agree. That is. I can't. I mean, yeah. From the factory, 600 is an Autolite. 4300 was 600 CFM of flow. So then that probably would be a pretty good carburetor to run on this thing. It probably would run well. I have heard the Autolite 4300 isn't that great of a carburetor, but I'm sure it ran great for what it was. I mean, it ran good enough to put 50,000 miles on this car back in the day. So, and I still have the original numbers matching Autolite 4300. I guess numbers matching. So anyway, I had never ran this carburetor on the car, so I threw it on there and did a little test drive to town and back. And this is a 600 CFM vacuum secondary. I did very little tuning to it at all. I put my Thompson Power Blast plate in the primaries. But I was very disappointed with the results in this 600. It really it lost a lot of snappiness that the 800 really has. Now, it's taken me a while to tune in the 800 that's in the car, but I've tuned out, I guess, the initial lean spot it had whenever you first tapped the throttle. It was very lean and it would miss a couple times. But I've tuned that out now, so now it's got really good throttle response, the first half throttle pedal, and then even pulling hard, full throttle, or I don't know, anyway, the whole throttle range really. I don't have any misses. I didn't have any today anyway. So that's good. It didn't miss, didn't go lean, didn't bog. Ran really good today. So what I'm saying here is a semi-properly tuned 800 L pumper was way more fun and way better, really, in every way than this. It just has way more snappiness, that carburetor does. And I ran the same ignition tune on both of them, so both of them had the same timing. This just seemed kind of slow. And I know you can run different, secondary springs to make the vacuum secondaries open quicker, but still, it still just seemed kind of slow and kind of not very good. So anyway, I'm very impressed with the way the 800 there, and it's a very old 574. I've had to rebush both the primary and secondary throttle shafts because it had such big vacuum leaks. Idle's great, runs great. I have no complaints with that carburetor. Now, so, like I said, 600 CFM was a factory on a 390 GT in 1969, and that would have been, like I said, an Autolite 4300. And at lower speeds, and for a stock application on a stock engine without headers or an intake or a cam, that would be probably a perfect carburetor. But I think that the reason this carburetor works better on my engine setup is because I have a Sidewinder intake manifold, which is a medium riser. It has far greater runner volume and plenum volume than that other cast iron one did. It flows a lot more air than the cast iron one did. And then I also have headers, long tube headers, Hooker long tube headers on here. So it's going to flow more exhaust as well, which is why I think a bigger carburetor is a good thing for this car and this setup, because it can maximize the header and the intake that I spent a lot of money on. So, you know, you don't want a restriction in your intake or exhaust flow. In my opinion, I think you should try and maximize what your camshaft can do, because obviously your camshaft is going to be the brain of your engine. So the last thing, in my mind, that you would want to modify would be your camshaft. If you want more power, put a set of headers on it, put an intake and a carburetor on it, you know, but don't leave the cam the way it is for the time being, because that cam was designed for lower operating ranges, for more torque at lower RPMs, so you can actually drive the car around and not have any problems. You don't have to go to 4,000 RPM to get it to move. So maximize the camshaft that you have, rather than just go, oh, well, I want my car to have a really nasty idle, so I'm just going to put a big cam in it and leave the stock manifolds and the stock carburetor and the stock intake manifold. But if you put a big cam in it, nothing else, you're not even using the cam that you put in there. You can't really use it the way it needs to be used. So the cam I have in here is a 390 GT cam 69 or 390 IP improved performance. I don't know what it's called. It's a pretty mild cam, very mild. It likes to idle about 650, 700 RPM. Maximize what you've already got. You don't need to go spend a bunch of money on a cam. I'd highly recommend you spend your money on an intake and some headers. One more thing on the carburetor notion. One thought I had to try and illustrate carburetor CFM is if you have a small, tiny straw, one of those stirring straws that you have in your coffee, you know, real tiny, thin red ones, you can't suck very much up in there, but you can get a lot of velocity. The smaller something is and the more, you know, suction you have on it, you can get more velocity, more power. But if you have a big straw, very large straw, then you don't necessarily get the velocity that you had, but you can get a whole lot more volume of air. So that's the way I think about this carburetor, the 800, as being a big straw, and this is kind of a littler straw. That carburetor with that intake and those headers can maximize the camshaft. On the last carburetor video I did, I think it was the carburetor shenanigans video, I had an excellent comment from Toolchanik, I believe is how you pronounce it. Really enjoyed his comment a lot. And he talked about a couple of things he did back in the day on his car to maximize fuel economy in hot and cold weather. Where I live in the Midwest, we have winter and we have summer, and they're very hot and very cold. Big difference in temperature can cause a big difference in fuel economy and the way fuel behaves and the way your car will run if it's carbureted. In the winter, you want to get warm air to the carburetor. So if your factory setup had a heat riser thing from the manifold up to the air cleaner, you know, use that. You want to, on startup, you want warm air going down your carburetor because it's going to make the fuel atomize better, which gives it into a vapor instead of a liquid, which combusts a whole lot easier than liquid vapor does. You can also run the factory half-inch carb spacer that had the coolant loop in it. It ran coolant through the spacer to heat up the carburetor as well. However, in the summer, you want exactly the opposite of that. You want to get the carburetor cool because it's going to be hot, and you can cause the fuel to boil. There's a fine line between getting your fuel warm enough to atomize and burn, and too hot, which will cause the fuel to turn into vapor before it gets metered by the carburetor, because the carburetor can only meter fuel if it's a liquid. It cannot meter fuel if it's a gas or a vapor. So essentially, you want to heat the carb in the winter and cool it down in the summer. How can we cool it down in the summer? He mentioned running a cooler thermostat in the summer, about 180 degrees instead of the 190 in the winter. I might do that. I don't know. I haven't actually tried that myself. I have a 190 degree thermostat and it runs about 190 degrees all the time. So I could probably put a 180 and probably run at 180. But I don't have any problems in the winter. I haven't had any problems with it in the winter, and I haven't had any problems with it in the springtime. So we'll just have to see what happens. But you want more fresh air in the summer. one of the ways you can do that is by getting an open element air cleaner, and then if your car is a hood scoop, then you can use that open element air cleaner and it'll help, get fresh air into the. The last thing I want to talk about is timing, ignition timing. So I have written down here very simple things. You want to advance your timing, okay? This is kind of, we may have to go to the whiteboard for this. It's kind of big thinking here. It's a lot to wrap your head around. But you want to advance your timing under cruising RPM, okay? Think about this. You're cruising down the highway, 2,500 RPM, pretty constant. You're 55 miles an hour, 2,500 RPM, straight away. Not going up a hill, but just, flat, pretty much. Low throttle angles. You don't have a whole lot of fuel in the cylinder. So your cylinder is not very full at lower throttle angles. So at cruise, you want to advance your timing because you want to make the explosion happen earlier because the particles are farther apart and takes longer for it to combust, for the flame propagation to occur. So under cruise, advance your timing. You want to make sure you've got a good advance going. That's why they have vacuum advance canisters on distributors, and you usually hook that to ported vacuum, which is above the venturis, or which is above the throttle blades underneath the venturis usually. And that will give you advance at a cruising RPM. For better fuel economy, also so you don't have detonation. So like I said, advance under cruise, and then retard your timing under load. So hear me out here. If you're wide open throttle, going up a hill, I don't know, your engine's under a lot of load. You have a lot of air going into the cylinders. They're getting pretty full of air, volumetrically full of air and fuel. So it's more, and then as it goes up, the piston goes up and compresses it, it's more dense. The fuel mixture is more dense. It's going to make more power. But because it's more dense, time it gets to the top, all of the particles are close together. Instead of being far apart, they're close together. So you want to retard your timing, because if you have too much timing, when it's all close together, it can cause detonation as well. Or before you want it to, anyway, which will not maximize your power. So you want to advance under cruise, because the particles are farther apart from each other in the cylinder. Retard under load, because the particles are closer together. Flame propagation happens quicker when the particles are closer together. Hopefully that makes sense. There's a thought I had on tuning. Anyway, that will pretty much conclude this video. It's pretty wild. Cars are crazy. But if I went back in time and I had to choose again between the 800 and the 600, originally I chose the 800 because it sounded cool. A lot more CFM. Oh, what you got in there? 800 double pumper. It just sounded a lot better to me. So that's kind of why I chose it. And it was basically free. So that helps too. But if you have a stock engine, stock application, stock carburetor will always do better. Alright guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope some of this made sense. Hope this helps you with some of your tuning things. I want to thank you to Tool Chanik for that comment. It's very nice of him. Alright, we'll see you next time on Little Run. Thanks for watching.